I discovered the Sunny Pines Homeowner Association was constructing 96 upscale homes on my inherited farmland. But when I located my grandfather's original property maps, their entire project suddenly became my lawful property. Would you believe? Their stunned faces when I disclosed my strategy at their own neighborhood meeting. I never thought I'd have to struggle for land that already belonged to me. When Grandpa Joe passed away last March, I inherited his 200-acre estate outside Meadow Creek. The old place had been in our lineage for generations. I lived far away in the metropolis with the hectic job that kept me from visiting as frequently as I should have. My phone rang at 6 o'clock a.m. on a Tuesday. It was Mrs. Thompson, Grandpa's neighbor for 40 years. They're constructing houses on your estate. Her voice trembled with outrage. Big yellow machinery started excavating yesterday. You need to come fast. At first, I thought she was mistaken. Maybe construction teams had crossed a boundary by accident. But Mrs. Thompson wasn't one to overstate the Sunny Pines. People put up banners all over. They're planning nearly 100 houses where your eastern fields are. I threw garments in a suitcase and drove straight to Meadow Creek, violating speed limits the whole way. 5 hours later, I turned onto the gravel road leading to Grandpa's farmhouse. The familiar path felt altered. Now, the tranquil countryside was disturbed by the roar of heavy equipment. Dust clouds ascended above the trees. As I reached the hill overlooking the eastern section of the property, my heart dropped. A fleet of bulldozers and diggers tore into the ground where Grandpa used to cultivate corn and soybeans. Workers in helmets moved around like ants, marking zones with bright orange spray paint. A massive sign stood near the road: future home of Sunny Pines East, 96 upscale homes, starting at $450,000. I parked my car and approached a woman standing apart from the laborers. She wore spotless beige trousers and a crisp white shirt. Despite the dusty setting, her hair was perfectly arranged and she held a clipboard while conversing on her phone. "Excuse me," I said, when she ended her call. "What's happening here?" She looked me up and down like I was a solicitor, disrupting her schedule. "We're preparing for residential expansion." Her voice was polished and composed. "Diane Reynolds, Sunny Pines' Homeowner Association president." She extended her hand without sincerity. "This is my estate," I said, disregarding her handshake. "My grandfather, Joe Miller, owned this farm. He passed away recently, and I inherited it." Diane's grin didn't reach her eyes. "There must be some misinterpretation. Sunny Pines Development acquired this land last year. We have all the essential permits and consents." "That's not possible. My grandfather would never trade this land." "Perhaps he didn't inform you." She sounded almost sympathetic. "The sale was completed 9 months ago. We've been planning this growth for years." My thoughts raced. Grandpa had been unwell during his final months, but his mind remained sharp. He wouldn't have given up his cherished farm without telling me something felt wrong. "I need to see those papers," I insisted. "You're welcome to contact our legal division." Diane handed me a business card, but I assure you, everything is in order. "Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a timetable to maintain." She turned away, already dialing another contact on her phone. I stood there feeling powerless as machines continued to rip up the land that had nourished my family for generations. Back at the farmhouse, Mrs. Thompson waited on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and a concerned expression. "They started appearing with surveying tools about 3 months ago," she explained. "Your grandpa was outraged. He kept saying they had no authority, that they were attempting to take what wasn't theirs." "Did he mention selling any land?" I asked. "Never. Joe swore this estate would remain in your family forever." Mrs. Thompson's eyes moistened. "The day before he went to the hospital for the final time, he was looking through his old study. Said he needed to locate something crucial to safeguard the farm. Grandpa's study remained untouched since his passing. I hadn't had the courage to go through his belongings when I briefly visited for the memorial. Now I needed answers." The small space smelled of pipe smoke and aged books. Shelves lined the walls filled with farming guides, family picture albums, and decades of meticulous records. Grandpa documented everything: rainfall, levels, crop production, machinery, maintenance. all written in his neat script. Where would he have stored property records? The filing drawer seemed the logical place to begin. I pulled open the top section and found files arranged by year. Nothing regarding land transactions or Sunny Pines. Hours passed as I searched. Night settled and my eyes grew weary from examining faded documents by lamplight. Just as I was about to surrender, I noticed a loose wooden plank under the desk. When I pressed it with my foot, it shifted slightly. I knelt down and lifted it open with a letter opener. Inside the small concealed space was a metallic box. The key hung from a nail on the underside of the desk. Inside the box, I found the deed to the estate, Grandpa's will naming me as his successor, and several yellowed charts of the property. But most intriguing was a note addressed to me in Grandpa's handwriting. If you're reading this, it started then. Someone's attempting to seize what's ours. My hands trembled. As I read his words, Grandpa explained that investors had been eyeing his property for years. They tried to coerce him into selling, but he always declined. In his final months, someone from Sunny Pines visited frequently. The man claimed to require a simple signature for a roadway easement, presenting different papers each time. I never signed away my estate, Grandpa wrote. If they say I did, it's a falsehood. Look at the original survey from 1910 and compare it to what's recorded at the county. Now, the evidence is in the boundaries. I dug further into the box and found the original survey. It displayed property lines that extended much beyond what I'd realized. According to this document, Grandpa's estate was nearly 280 acres, not the 200 listed in recent records. Sleep escaped me that night. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, contrasting the old survey with newer maps. Something peculiar had occurred over the years. The eastern boundary had shifted, diminishing our land. It wasn't just the area under construction. According to these original papers, we possessed land where part of the current Sunny Pines neighborhood already stood. At sunrise, I knew what I had to do. First, I needed a lawyer. Then I needed to uncover exactly what Diane Reynolds and her homeowner association were planning. If they assumed they could cheat my family, they were about to face an unpleasant surprise. I folded Grandpa's note and placed it in my pocket. "I won't let you down," I murmured to the vacant room. Little did Diane realize, she hadn't just interfered with a mourning descendant. She'd walked straight into a snare set by a man who'd foreseen her actions even from the grave. I didn't sleep that night. By 8 o'clock a.m., I waited outside the office of Walter Franklin, the only property attorney in Meadow Creek. His assistant looked startled when I asked for an urgent appointment, but she managed to fit me in before noon. "So you believe Sunny Pines is constructing on land that belongs to you?" Walter said, after I described my situation. He was older than I anticipated, with thick spectacles and a bow tie that seemed from another time. I spread the documents across his desk. "These are the original maps from 1910, revised in 1978. Compare them to the present county records." Walter examined both sets of papers, tracing boundary markers with his finger. His eyebrows lifted higher with each passing moment. "This is extremely unusual," he finally said. "According to these original records, your land extends nearly half a mile further east than what's currently documented. That would include not just the development site, but also the existing Sunny Pines clubhouse and about 20 houses built 5 years ago." I concluded for him. Walter removed his spectacles and rubbed his temples. "A boundary conflict of this scale won't be straightforward. We need to determine how and when these modifications happen." In the formal record, he contacted the county assessor's office, putting the call on speaker. After navigating a labyrinth of departments, we uncovered something startling. In 1984, minor alteration to the eastern boundary was recorded, just a 10 ft easement for infrastructure. But in 1997, a significantly larger revision appeared, decreasing the land by nearly 80 acres. The documentation was minimal, just a form with a signature that barely resembled Grandpa's. "He would have been in the hospital that period," I said, verifying the date. "Triple bypass surgery. He couldn't have signed this." Walter's expression grew serious. "That would constitute forgery, but proving it after all these years won't be simple." "What can we do?" I asked. Submit for an urgent injunction to stop development immediately. Then request the court to acknowledge the original boundaries based on the historic maps. We'll need a certified surveyor to authenticate these old charts. As Walter prepared the emergency petition, I realized I needed additional proof. I drove to the county archives and asked for everything they had on Sunny Pines Development Company. Hours later, hidden in a remote section of the library with piles of public documents, I uncovered gold. Sunny Pines wasn't just a housing project. It was an intricate network of LCs and holding firms. The same 6 individuals appeared repeatedly: Diane Reynolds, her husband, Thomas Reynolds, County Commissioner James Harris, Planning Board Director Mark Wilson, and 2 others I didn't recognize. But the most fascinating record was from just 3 months ago: a loan approval for $16 million to finance Sunny Pines East, with the land itself listed as collateral. My land. I captured photos of everything with my phone and proceeded to my next stop: the offices of the Meadow Creek Gazette, our local newspaper. The editor, Tanya Williams, had known my grandfather. When I informed her I was probing potential deceit involving influential local figures, her journalistic instincts heightened. "I can't print allegations without proof," she cautioned, "but I can investigate the approval procedure for this project." It did seem to progress unusually fast. Back at the farmhouse, I found Mrs. Thompson conversing with another elderly neighbor, Mr. Grayson. When I brought up Diane Reynolds, his expression hardened. "That woman is the reason I sold my home," he said bitterly. "The homeowner association penalized me every week for unauthorized landscaping. I'd been cultivating those tomatoes for 20 years. Then they claimed my workshop breached some rule they suddenly enforced. The penalties kept increasing until I couldn't afford to resist anymore." How many others faced this? I asked. "At least a dozen longtime residents sold out in the last 5 years. Always for below market rate. Always to companies I later discovered were linked to those Sunny Pines individuals. A pattern surfaced fine. Vulnerable property owners intimidate them with fines and restrictions, pressure them to sell cheaply, develop the land, and generate millions. My grandfather had been their latest victim, but he'd been one step ahead. My phone rang. "Walter Franklin, the judge approved our emergency injunction. He said construction has to cease immediately until a hearing next week. But be prepared. This is going to get rough." I appreciated him and hung up. Feeling a minor triumph, I drove back to the construction site. With the court order in hand, the laborers were wrapping up for the day. When I arrived, Diane's polished black SUV still sat near the side office. She emerged as I approached, phone to her ear as usual. When she saw me, her expression stiffened. "Construction stops now," I said, handing her the court order. "Legal boundaries are in question." She examined the document, her flawless composure wavering slightly. "This is absurd. We have every authorization we need based on forged boundaries. I have the original maps." For the first time, hesitation flickered in her eyes. It disappeared swiftly, replaced by cold resolve. "This little stunt will cost you," she said firmly. "You have no clue who you're challenging." "Actually, I do. 6 names on multiple business registrations, $16 million in loans using seized land as collateral. County authorities expediting approvals for ventures they secretly invest in." I hadn't intended to expose how much I knew, but the reaction on her face was priceless. Diane's precisely manicured hand clenched around her phone until her knuckles turned pale. "You're making an error," she whispered. "We can negotiate. Perhaps you'd consider an attractive offer for the remaining farmland. 7 figures, instant payment." "Not interested. Everyone has a price." Her smirk returned, confident and predatory. "Think about it. You don't even reside here. Why does it matter to you? This old land has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale." I turned to leave, sensing her gaze piercing into my back. As I reached my car, she called out, "Commissioner Harris is my husband's golf companion. Judge Evans attends my dinner parties. You think your injunction will hold? You're insignificant in this town." I drove away, her words resonating. In my mind, she was right about one thing. I was a newcomer here now, but she had overlooked something crucial. Grandpa wasn't. He had spent his entire life in Meadow Creek, knew everyone, and was respected even by those who disagreed with him. And he'd left me more than just property. Back at the farmhouse, I returned to his study. If Grandpa had foreseen this battle, what else had he arranged? I searched more meticulously, inspecting every folder, every diary. In an album titled Community Picnic 2018, I found dozens of pictures of Grandpa with residents, local shop owners, and families who'd known him forever. Each picture had names inscribed on the back. These weren't just recollections, they were relationships, individuals who might support me against Sunny Pines. My phone vibrated with a message from an unknown sender. Parking violation at your property. Penalty $500. Sunny Pines' homeowner association. Compliance included was a snapshot of my car parked at Grandpa's farm, my own estate. This was how it began. The cycle. Mr. Grayson had detailed intimidation through bureaucracy, but unlike the others, I recognized their scheme now, and I had something they didn't foresee. Grandpa's hidden asset, still secured in his files, waiting for the perfect moment. As darkness settled over the farm, I sat on the porch where Grandpa used to narrate stories during summer evenings. The eastern fields lay silent now, construction machinery abandoned under the court order. But this was merely the start. Tomorrow, Diane would summon her contacts. The real struggle was imminent. What she didn't realize was that I'd uncovered more than just property surveys. In Grandpa's concealed box, I'd found records that didn't just question the boundary alterations, they revealed who had falsified them, when, and how. Diane assumed she was dealing with the distant grandchild struggling for nostalgic land. She had no clue she was confronting the legacy of my grandfather, who recorded every corrupt deal and questionable approval for years, patiently constructing a case while they thought he was merely a persistent old farmer. The snare was set. All I had to do was let them step deeper into it. My heart raced as I pushed open the glass doors of the Sunny Pines Community Center. Tonight was the night I'd been preparing for weeks. Inside, nearly 100 people filled rows of collapsible chairs. They chatted excitedly about new tennis facilities and elegant streets while sipping punch from small disposable cups at the front. Diane Reynolds stood poised in her bright red jacket, pointing at vibrant pictures of luxurious houses on a screen. Just visualize the swimming pool with its waterfall element, she said, grinning at the crowd. Our properties will be valued so much higher. Once these new occupants settle in, people applauded, a few whistled. Nobody realized what I carried in my folder would dismantle their celebration. I took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle. Excuse me, said, loudly enough to make heads turn. I need to address this project. Diane's grin faltered for a moment, then reappeared more artificial than before. We'll entertain questions after the presentation. This is urgent, I responded, stepping onto the small platform I faced. The intrigued audience. My name is Alex Morgan. My grandfather possessed Willow Creek Farm for 60 years. The old estate we acquired, Diane interjected swiftly. Yes. We're delighted to finally transform that wasteland. Murmurs spread through the room. I opened my folder and lifted the first document. This is the original property survey from 1910, I said, displaying it. And this is the revised survey from 1978. I presented another paper. According to these legal records, my grandfather's land stretches 80 acres farther east than what is displayed in present county files. I turned to face the homeowner association board members seated in a row behind the lectern. I placed copies before each of them. Simply put, I continued, you're constructing on land that lawfully belongs to me, and not just the upcoming development. Based on these boundaries, 20 existing houses and your clubhouse are positioned on my estate as well. The room erupted with voices. Individuals stood up. Someone knocked over a chair. This is absurd, Diane yelled, grabbing one of the surveys. We have authorizations. We've sold plots. Construction has already begun. I remained composed while she grew more flustered. Your authorizations are based on inaccurate property lines. I submitted documents to the court to halt all building immediately. Gerald Fisher, a balding man with thick spectacles, who served as the homeowner association treasurer, examined the records with rising alarm. Diane, he murmured loudly enough for the microphone to capture these boundary points align with the old creek bed. They appear legitimate. She snatched the papers from his grip. This is obviously some sort of scheme to extort money from us. We'll contest this nonsense. You're free to attempt, I replied, pulling out one final document. But here's something crucial to understand. According to these legal markers, your personal residence, Diane, is entirely on what is officially my property. The room fell completely silent. People exchanged glances, suddenly realizing the implications. 20 families might not genuinely own the ground beneath their homes. A man in the back stood up. Are you saying we could lose our residences? Before I could respond, Diane slammed her hand on the lectern. This meeting is over. Everyone leave. The board needs to deliberate privately. As people shuffled out, murmuring anxiously, a younger woman touched my arm. I'm Rachel Winters. I just invested my entire savings into a lot in the new area. What happens to me? I hadn't expected to encounter the personal toll so directly. I'm not attempting to harm ordinary people. Told her sincerely. This is about correcting a wrong. Don't believe a word, Diane hissed suddenly beside us. After everyone else departed, she leaned close to my face. You have no clue who you're interfering with. I built Sunny Pines from scratch. Nobody takes it away from me. Her warning lingered in the air between us as she stormed off, leaving me alone in the vacant room. Through the windows I could see groups of anxious homeowners in the parking lot. My phone vibrated with a message from Mr. Wallace. How did it go? I replied. They know now. Prepare for their next step. What I didn't tell him was how unsettled I felt. I had ignited the fire, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for the explosion that would follow. These weren't just buildings on a blueprint, they were people's homes and aspirations. But they had constructed those dreams on my grandfather's seized land. Someone would eventually lose everything, and Diane Reynolds wasn't going to surrender without a battle. I jolted awake to the noise of engines outside my grandfather's farmhouse. Intense lights beamed through the windows. I stumbled to the porch to find 3 white SUVs with Sunny Pines security marked on their doors stationed in a row blocking my driveway. Men in uniforms stood by the cars. One stepped forward, handing me a thick envelope. Cease and desist notice from the Sunny Pines Homeowner Association, he said blankly. You are directed to abandon all claims against the project or face litigation. I ripped open the envelope. Inside was a letter stating my documents were fraudulent and that I was attempting to commit deception. They insisted I pay for harm to the community's credibility. You can't be serious, I said. The man shrugged, just relaying the message. Have a pleasant day. He returned to his vehicle, but none of them departed. I attempted to leave for breakfast in town, but discovered they had positioned massive concrete barriers across the exit of my driveway overnight. Sorry, sir, one guard said, without appearing apologetic. This access route hasn't been sanctioned by the development committee. It's been closed for precautionary reasons. I was confined on my own land. I called the sheriff's office, but was informed they couldn't intervene in a civil conflict and suggested I hire a lawyer. My phone rang. Diane's name appeared on the screen. Hadn't shared my number. Good morning, she said sweetly when I answered, enjoying the scenery. This is intimidation, I said. You can't obstruct access to my estate. Actually, according to county records, the valid ones, that driveway crosses Sunny Pines' communal areas were within our authority to regulate entry. You know those records are incorrect. She laughed. Let me explain the system. The county commissioner plays golf with my husband every weekend. The building inspector's daughter works for my property firm. The water department chief resides in Sunny Pines. I felt my stomach tighten as she proceeded. By tomorrow your farmhouse will be marked for at least 15 code infractions. Your water might be disconnected due to maintenance issues. Local contractors won't return your calls because they understand better than to oppose me. That's unlawful, I said. That's small town politics, she responded. You can't overcome this, but I'm fair. Withdraw your claim, sign over the disputed land, and this all disappears. I'll even offer a generous sum for your inconvenience. This isn't about wealth, I told her. It's always about wealth, dear. Think it through. You have until tomorrow. She disconnected. I gazed at my phone, then at the security vehicle still positioned outside. They weren't moving as Diane predicted. By afternoon, a county inspector arrived to assess the farmhouse. He identified faults with everything: the wiring, the septic tank, the porch supports. He handed me a list of infractions that would require thousands to repair, all urgent. As he departed, another truck pulled in. Workers placed signs along my property boundary: future home of Sunny Pines East Premium Living. Coming soon. My water pressure dropped to a drizzle. When I called the utility provider, they claimed there was servicing work occurring and couldn't confirm when it would be restored. I attempted ordering pizza for dinner. The driver called to say he couldn't locate my address. Though delivery had never been an issue before, I was being isolated step by step. That night, I sat on the porch in darkness, observing the security lights sweeping across the fields where my grandfather had once cultivated crops. Their bulldozers rested motionless in the distance, waiting to resume erasing his legacy. My phone lit up with a notification from Mr. Wallace. They've submitted a counter lawsuit alleging your documents are fabricated. Court date scheduled for 3 months from now. They'll continue constructing in the meantime. 3 months. By then, the residences would be nearly completed. The damage would be irreversible. I scrolled through my contacts searching for anyone who might assist. A name caught my attention: Janet Rivera, journalist for the local newspaper. We'd attended high school together. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but perhaps as I debated calling her, headlights appeared on the long driveway. A vehicle cautiously maneuvered around the concrete obstructions and approached the house. I stiffened, wondering what new problem Diane was sending my direction. The car stopped, and a recognizable figure stepped out: Gerald Fisher, the homeowner association treasurer, who had examined my records at the gathering. I shouldn't be here, he said uneasily, glancing toward the security vehicles in the distance. If Diane finds out, why are you here? I asked. He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. Because what she's doing isn't right. I've been managing the HOA accounts for 7 years. There are details you need to see. I welcomed him inside, away from prying eyes. At my kitchen table, he opened his laptop and displayed financial statements, meeting transcripts, and emails. Diane and the board have been utilizing HOA finances like their personal funds, he explained. Unexplained fees that vanish. Agreements awarded to relatives' reserve accounts that get funneled into private investments. Why reveal this to me? I asked. Because I'm not the only frustrated homeowner, Gerald said. Many of us are exhausted by her policies and her control. When you arrived with those land documents, it was the first time I've seen her uneasy. He pointed to a ledger. Look at these special charges from last year. Every homeowner paid $2,000 for road maintenance. The actual expense was half that amount. The rest disappeared. That's embezzlement, I said. Gerald nodded. And there's more. The 20 residences you claimed are on your property. The occupants have been complaining about drainage concerns for years. Diane keeps assuring solutions, but nothing is done. Now, we understand why she was aware those houses might not officially belong to the HOA. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. We stand with you against Diane. The Millers, 42 Sunny Pine Lane. She penalized us $500 for growing vegetables instead of decorative plants. Can we assist Jackson family? Our kids' playground set was removed without explanation. We want to support your case. The Rodriguez's. Gerald smirked slightly. I may have shared your contact with a few allies. For the first time since this fight started, I felt optimism. Diane had authority, influence, and resources, but she had also created adversaries, many of them we need a strategy, I said, and I believe I know where to begin. As Gerald departed, carefully steering past the security personnel, I observed a light drizzle beginning to fall on the incomplete homes in the distance. Diane thought she was forcing me into submission. Instead, she had just helped me uncover the supporters I required to win this conflict. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would stop playing defense. My grandfather always said, the best trap isn't one your enemy walks into. It's one they assist in building. Without realizing it, Diane had just delivered the final pieces I needed. My water got disconnected yesterday. The electricity followed. This morning, I stood in my grandfather's kitchen staring at spoiled groceries in the warm fridge. Diane Reynolds assumed she could pressure me off my own estate by making conditions unbearable. She had another thing coming. I grabbed my notebook and stepped out. If Diane wanted conflict, I needed supporters. The first person I approached was Mrs. Thompson, who answered her door in a floral house coat. "They cut off your utilities," she gasped. "That's unlawful." "So is developing on my property," I replied. "But Diane has allies at the county office. I need to know who else might despise the homeowner association as much as we do." Mrs. Thompson's eyes gleamed. "Oh, dear, grab a seat. This might take some time." She provided me with 15 names. Households who'd been penalized for the incorrect style mailbox. Senior couples threatened with claims for having grandchildren visit too frequently. A single mother who couldn't afford the $900 charge for setting up a small fence to protect her toddler. I spent the entire day knocking on doors throughout Sunny Pines. Initially, people were hesitant to talk, but when I displayed my property records, something shifted. Optimism replaced anxiety. Sarah Jenkins, whose garden had been forcibly destroyed, welcomed me inside for lemonade. Diane forced my husband to remove our tomato plants because vegetables weren't visually appealing, she said, hands trembling with frustration. We received a $500 penalty. My husband works 2 jobs already. The Patel household had spent $3,000 contesting the homeowner association over their porch bench. The Johnsons weren't allowed to paint their entrance door the shade they wanted. Every house appeared exactly the same, beige with white edges. "It's not just the regulations," Trevor Martinez explained, while his wife Maria agreed. "It's how they impose them." Diane drives around capturing photos of infractions. Some individuals receive warnings, others get instant penalties. There's no fairness. By sunset, I spoke with 27 households, all with comparable grievances, all afraid of Diane Reynolds. I picked up my phone and contacted Mr. Wallace, my lawyer. "Can we lawfully establish a rival homeowners association?" I asked. "On your property?" "Absolutely," he replied. "But what about the present residences?" "That's where it becomes intriguing," I said. "I'm going to require the community center for a gathering tomorrow night." Mr. Wallace chuckled. "They'll never permit you to use it. They don't own it." "I do, according to my property maps recall." The next day, I printed 200 notices. "Urgent community meeting. Your residence could be in jeopardy." I attached copies of the original property survey. As nightfall approached, the community center exceeded capacity. 97 families attended. People stood against walls. When the chairs were filled, Diane arrived last, forcing her way through the crowd. Her expression contorted with anger. "This meeting is unauthorized. Everyone must vacate immediately." Sarah Jenkins stood up. "Or what? More penalties haven't you taken enough from us already?" The hall erupted in cheers. I walked to the front, raising my hands for silence. "I didn't come here to create problems," I started. "I came because my grandfather's land was taken. But after meeting all of you, I understood. I'm not the only victim." For the next hour, residents narrated experiences of homeowner association exploitation. Emotions ran high. Voices quivered with intensity. Diane sat rigidly in the back, typing furiously on her phone. "Here's what I suggest," I said. Once everyone had expressed themselves, we established the Meadow Creek Homeowners Coalition. Together, we negotiate revised property boundaries that are just for everyone. We develop a fresh community contract with fair policies and honest finances. "You can't do that," Diane yelled. "These properties are legally bound to Sunny Pines' homeowner association." I held up the original land survey agreements based on fraudulent property claims aren't enforceable, Ms. Reynolds, but I'm not here to remove anyone from their home. I'm here to correct what's unjust. The decision was nearly unanimous. 89 families enrolled in the coalition immediately as individuals exited. Energized and optimistic, Gerald Jenkins, the HOA treasurer, approached me discreetly. "There's something you should know," he whispered, glancing anxiously at Diane across the room. "The HOA funds, they don't add up." Monthly fees keep rising, but our reserves are diminishing. I've attempted to investigate, but Diane manages all the accounts. I patted his shoulder. Would you be willing to let me examine the records? He nodded. Tomorrow morning, my office. Diane stormed over, pointing her finger at my face. You've made a dreadful mistake. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever stepping into Meadow Creek. Is that a warning, Miss Reynolds? It's a guarantee. I have the county commissioner, the police chief, and the district judge on speed dial. This little uprising ends now. What she didn't realize was that I'd invited a journalist from the Meadow Creek Gazette to quietly sit at the back of the gathering. Every word had been recorded, every threat documented. As Diane slammed the door behind her, my phone buzzed. With a message from Mr. Wallace. Environmental analysis results arrived. You won't believe what's beneath that land. I grinned. Diane believed she held all the influence. But Grandpa always said the truth was the most potent weapon of all. And tomorrow, the truth about Sunny Pines Hoa would be headline news. I woke up to police vehicles surrounding my grandfather's farmhouse. Through the window, I noticed Diane Reynolds standing next to a tall officer. Time to confront the situation. You're trespassing on private land, the police chief declared as I opened the door. I smiled calmly. Actually, Chief Williams, believe you'll find I'm the rightful landowner. I handed him a folder containing the original land surveys in my grandfather's deed. These records haven't been authenticated, Diane snapped. They have, actually. A woman stepped forward from a car. I hadn't noticed. Carolyn Mitchell, County Records Office. We retrieved the original surveys last night after receiving some alarming reports. Diane's face turned pale. What reports? I gestured toward the farmhouse. Perhaps we should talk inside. Coffee's ready. 15 minutes later, the kitchen table hosted an unexpected assembly. The police chief, the county records clerk, Mr. Wallace, my lawyer, and Diane, whose flawless makeup couldn't conceal her growing anxiety. The original property boundaries were incorrectly documented. In 1973, Carolyn explained, spreading charts across the table. This entire section, including the existing Sunny Pines residences and the new construction, legally belongs to the Richards estate. The police chief whistled. That's quite an oversight. Not an oversight, Mr. Wallace said calmly. We have proof indicating the boundary alteration was intentional. Absurd. Diane slammed her hand on the table. This is a ploy to extort funds from hardworking homeowners. Speaking of funds, I said, sliding a folder toward the police chief. Gerald Jenkins provided these financial records yesterday. 3 years of Sunny Pines Hoa accounts. As the chief flipped through the pages, his expression darkened. Miss Reynolds, can you clarify why $427,000 in homeowner dues was deposited into Sunshine Consulting, LC? That's our authorized management company, she responded rigidly. Registered to your son-in-law, I added, along with 4 other firms that charge the Hoa for services, landscaping, security, maintenance, legal counsel, all directed to businesses owned by your family members. The chief closed the folder. Miss Reynolds, we're going to need you to accompany us to the station. This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? My husband golfs with Judge Harrington every Sunday. As the chief escorted a protesting Diane out, Carolyn turned to me. What happens next? Those homeowners? I have no intention of displacing anyone, I reassured her. But the project needs to be suspended until we can accurately survey the wetlands. By afternoon, construction had stopped. Local news vans lined the street. Outside the farmhouse, my phone rang endlessly with calls from anxious homeowners. I called an urgent town hall meeting for that evening. The local high school auditorium was the only venue large enough. Nearly 400 people filled the hall. Current homeowners, construction laborers now without employment, county officials, and intrigued residents. Worry and frustration filled the air. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. My name is Richards. This was my grandfather's estate. I didn't come here seeking conflict. I came to preserve his legacy. Shouts interrupted me. What about our homes? We'll sue. My entire savings is invested in that property. I raised my hands. Please, I'm not here to take anything from you. In fact, I want to propose a solution that helps everyone. The room quieted slightly. I continued first. All current homeowners will receive legitimate legal deeds to their properties. No one will be displaced. Murmurs of relief spread through the crowd. Second, the new development will be redesigned to safeguard the wetlands that my grandfather valued. These aren't just marshes. They're crucial habitats and natural flood barriers for the whole region. I clicked to the next slide displaying Grandpa's environmental research. These wetlands are home to 3 endangered species. Developing on them isn't just unethical, it's unlawful under federal regulations. A man stood up. I put my entire savings into a plot in the new section. What happens to my purchase? Valid concern. We're creating a property exchange program. Anyone who acquired land in the restricted zone can trade for an equivalent plot in the revised community. No one loses their investment. For the next hour, I presented my vision. A neighborhood that blended homes with nature, transparent leadership, reasonable regulations, fair dues. That genuinely contributed to community enhancements. Toward the conclusion, Sarah Jenkins took the microphone. I've lived under Diane's rules for 8 years. I couldn't paint my entrance door blue. I couldn't cultivate tomatoes. My kids couldn't play outdoors after 7 o'clock p.m. because it breached the noise policy. She looked around the hall. Is that truly the neighborhood we want? By the time the meeting adjourned, we had over 300 signatures backing the new Meadow Creek Community Association. Even some of Diane's previous allies switched sides, including Gerald, who agreed to assist in unraveling the financial chaos. The next 6 months were challenging. Diane hired costly attorneys who attempted every tactic to overturn our claims, but the proof was overwhelming. She ultimately agreed to a settlement on the financial fraud allegations. Today, 1 year later, I'm sitting on my grandfather's porch, watching children ride bikes past homes with doors painted every shade of the spectrum. The community garden where Sarah's tomatoes grow abundantly is bustling with neighbors exchanging gardening advice. Behind me, Grandpa's farmhouse has been repurposed into our community center. Workshops, gatherings, and celebrations occur daily. The wetlands are safeguarded by a conservation agreement with walking trails and educational plaques describing the significance of each plant and animal. Mrs. Thompson joins me on the porch, handing me lemonade. Your grandfather would be overflowing with pride, she says, pointing to where construction has finally resumed on the revised development. Smaller residences, more open areas, solar panels on every roof. I discovered something while cleaning out his study. I tell her, pulling out a faded notebook. Grandpa's journal from 30 years ago. He fought the original builders back then too, when they first attempted to develop on the wetlands. Mrs. Thompson smiles. He always said you were just like him, determined as a mule when fighting for what's right. In the distance, a blue heron lifts from the protected marsh, soaring above homes where people now coexist with the land. Sometimes the best trap isn't about catching someone doing wrong. It's about showing them a better method to do right. Diane's homeowner association attempted to seize my land, but instead, they handed me something far more precious.